This is today's Bible reading. Chasing the gods of Moab, Numbers 25, 1 through 9. The Israelites had no sooner been blessed by the prophet Balaam than they turned to the worship of the god Baal of Pur, Numbers 25, 1 through 9. Balaam had attempted to curse them, but God intervened. This was another in a series of events, beginning with the Exodus itself, in which God's salvation was repaid with complaints and apostasy. What happened at the mountain called Pur in Moab? The Israelite men, being attracted to the Moabite women, accepted an invitation to their religious festivals where Baal of Pur, the god of the mountain, was worshipped. Baal of Pur was a prominent god of the Moabites, as well as of the Midianites and Ammonites. The Israelites ate at the sacrifices. Whenever people in the ancient world killed animals for food, the slaughter was done in a ritual of sacrifice. The sacrifice gave honor to the deity to whom the meal was dedicated. Eating the meat served from the sacrifice was considered an act of worship of that deity, even if there were no other rituals or religious actions involved. The Israelites who joined in the feast not only ate the sacrifice, but also bowed down to the Moabite gods. The men had not just gone along with the women for sexual favors and a free meal. Rather, they had joined the local cult devoted to the local god. For worshiping gods other than Israel's God, the punishment was death. Leaving the corpses of the offenders exposed was a practice used also by the Assyrian armies. It both disgraced the dead and served as a warning to others. Swearing to the gods, Numbers 32. Emar has recently become a source for the understanding of Middle Euphrates Syria in the late Bronze Age, 1500 to 1200 BC. The city of Emar, or Imar, as it was apparently known, is indirectly referred to in texts from Ebla in the 3rd millennium BC and from Mari in the 18th century BC. In later centuries, from about 1350 to 1187 BC, Emar was a Hittite protectorate or dependent state. Over 2,000 cuneiform texts, mostly written in Akkadian, have been found at Emar. Many of these texts share distinct literary parallels with the Old Testament, and a number of features in the Emar textual collection appear to have a direct bearing on the understanding of the biblical text. These include the Emar installation festivals, calendar, rites for the dead, and rituals for the prophetic and priestly offices. One such parallel between Emar and the Bible concerns vows made to the deity. According to Israel's law concerning vows to God, any Israelite who swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement. Concerning vows to God, any Israelite who swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement must carry out the oath and honor the agreement. At Emar, it seems that people swore by their ancestors' gods in order to protect their property rights. The inheritance clauses of certain texts from Emar show that heirs would swear by the gods of their deceased relative. Both cultures settled legal affairs by swearing to their deities. The River of Egypt, Numbers 34, 1 through 5. Numbers 34 describes the boundaries of the promised land Canaan, which the Israelites would inherit. The southern border extended to the Brook of Egypt. which is also known as the River of Egypt. Without thought, one could confuse this River of Egypt with the Nile River, since the Nile is and always has been the life of Egyptian history and the people. The Nile River is at times intended by the biblical writer, but is called simply the river. The name Nile comes from the Greco-Roman period and was unknown in earlier times. The Egyptians referred to the Nile by a word equivalent to river, and the Hebrew modification of this Egyptian word appears most often in the Old Testament when the Nile is intended. The phrases River of Egypt and Brook of Egypt are referring to the Wadi El Arish, a river that flows from the Sinai Peninsula's central high plateau to the low-lying Mediterranean coast. Most people in ancient times came and left Egypt by traveling along the northern edge of the Sinai Peninsula. The Wadi El Arish intersects the peninsula on its eastern edge and thus marked for ancient people the easternmost boundary of Egypt. That is why the phrases River of Egypt and Brook of Egypt are found where geographic boundaries are described. Transition, the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy opens where the book of Numbers closes. The Hebrew people are on the plains of Moab, across the Jordan from Jericho. The journey from Kadesh Barnea, which is reported to take 11 days, was now over. After 40 years in the wilderness, of the whole generation that refused to accept God's promise of the land of Canaan, only 3 persons were left: Joshua, Caleb, and Moses. Except for a few introductory and concluding statements referring to Moses in the third person, the book of Deuteronomy consists of Moses' speeches to the people of Israel on the eve of their crossing the Jordan River to capture the promised land. In his first speech, he reviews the history of the people's travels from Egypt to their current place on the eastern banks of the Jordan. His second speech summarizes the commandments that God had given on Mount Sinai, including a second presentation of the 10 Commandments in chapter 5. The name Deuteronomy, which is derived from Latin and means second law, refers to their speech. The third speech is Moses' farewell and includes exhortations, songs, and blessings. The structure of the book can be compared to a common ancient Near Eastern treaty format, found especially among the Hittites. Such treaties began with a preamble and historical prologue. In Deuteronomy, the first speech proceeded to the conditions and stipulations of the agreement, as in Moses' second speech, declared the blessings and curses that would result from obedience or disobedience, called on heavenly witnesses, and provided for the care of the treaty document. Again, we see God and his representatives speaking in language and forms that would have been familiar to the original ancient Israelite audience. The huge influence of Deuteronomy on the rest of the Old Testament is indisputable. Its highly distinct style appears throughout the historical books and in several of the prophets, and it was very probably the book discovered in the temple that prompted the reforms of King Joshua. Some scholars accept Moses as the author, while others do not. Particularly, the account of Moses' death in chapter 34. Nevertheless, even those who consider the earlier books of Genesis through Numbers to be carefully edited composites from different sources agree on the fundamental unity of Deuteronomy. Transition, God's mighty acts. In his first speech, Deuteronomy 1:6-4:43, Moses very carefully prepared his people to obey God and enter the land. He did so by showing what had brought them to this point, both disobedience and obedience. Then he reminded them of the significance of those startling events at Sinai and of God's election of them to be his special people. This historical recital serves as the prologue to God's covenant with his chosen people. See covenantal obedience in Deuteronomy 4:44. Transition, covenantal obedience. A brief introduction describes the setting for Moses' second speech, explaining how Israel arrived on the east side of the Jordan. The first section of the speech summarizes the covenant obligations and explains what the statutes and judgments are about and why obedience to them would be crucial for Israel to enjoy the covenant blessings. The second section lists specific requirements, intermingling civil, ceremonial, and moral laws. In this speech, Moses reminds the people of their covenant obligations to be kept when they enter the land. It is plain, especially in chapters 6-11, that his purpose was not primarily informational, but motivational. His concern was to ensure that they would obey what they knew. How is an idol a god? Deuteronomy 5:8-9. The prohibition of Deuteronomy 5:8-9 reflects a world where bowing down to idols meant worshiping not just images, but deities. Representations of gods in human, animal, or abstract forms were everywhere in the ancient Near East. Scattered from Egypt through Syria, Palestine, and throughout Mesopotamia were local temples housing these images. Beliefs differed as to whether or not gods were really there in the statues. In Egypt, the gods were understood to be always in heaven above the human world, yet always in the images as well. The statues were considered to be the body of the god into which the presence of the deity entered. For this reason, the body was clothed, bathed, and fed as one would care for a ruler. Since heavenly deities were invisible, the statues were normally kept in the dark, inner room of the temples, away from the eyes of the people. Except for feast days, when the image was brought out on procession, only the attending priests were allowed into the image's presence. In Mesopotamia, the understanding of images was slightly different. The image was considered only wood, stone, or metal as long as it was being fashioned. However, once it was set up in the temple, a lengthy ritual called opening the mouth changed the nature of the image. Through this religious ritual, the deity supposedly entered the statue so that the idol became the god and, at that point, could receive praise, bestow blessings, and grant favors. The image was understood to be a gift of the god who dwelt within it. Therefore, any image that was looted in warfare was taken as absolute proof that the favor of the deity had passed to the victors. In contrast to the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, Israel's worship was to be imageless. The commandment in Deuteronomy 5:8-9 condemns the fashioning of any image, any likeness of anything. Moreover, The commandment even forbids making an image of the God of Israel. Amen. This is the end of the Bible reading today. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day. God bless you, and see you tomorrow.